Hi, my name is Levi Knight, Youth Program Coordinator for the Mighty Creatives, and you're listening to the Mighty Voices podcast, where we discuss topics that concern young people and what the role of creativity has in those topics. So today, we're going to be talking about managing a diagnosis. So I've got two wonderful guests. I've got
Sophie.
And I've also got
Hannah.
And Hannah is a member of our brilliant youth board. So thank you for coming. Welcome. Hello. So as usual, we go through an icebreaker when we start. So I'm going to ask, what book are you reading, or what piece of art have you seen, heard, discovered recently that's had an impact on you? It doesn't have to be a book or piece of art. It can be absolutely anything. Hannah.
I have been learning about fashion, and I didn't realise, I didn't realise, but like looking at fashion from like the artistic point of view, something like I'm needing to learn more about fashion for something that I'm doing. And I've never seen it in kind of an art form and as a communication. And it's been really interesting to kind of, as I'm delving into the history of fashion and like clothes and designers and stuff, it's really interesting to see it as an art form. It's been really good, actually.
Are there any particular designers that you like?
No, not any. I'm still very much learning. And I think like in terms of what I like to wear, I'm very much like on Pinterest, just choosing like outfits. But I think in terms of like actually, there's still a lot to learn, but I think it's very, very interesting. Yeah. Like it's something that I think you can look at fashion very much at a face value, but actually there's so much that goes on behind it, and it's really interesting as it is a form of art. Actually, what it is. So yeah.
Did you recently see that article about I don't know what fashion I think it was Dior actually, where it cost £44 to make a Dior bag that they sell for like I'm pulling a number out the air now, like plus £1,000 plus.
Yes,
pounds.
It is very bonkers. I think
a big markup.
Yeah, it's definitely been. It's eye opening when the more you learn about it and research it, the history and stuff.
Well, I suppose there's an argument that they've put in the work for so many years that they've built that brand name and image, and I don't know.
There's lots of ethics around the fashion industry.
Yeah,
that's a podcast in itself.
Yeah, I don't think I could spend £1,000 plus on a bag.
No, I couldn't.
At all. I'd need a lot of change from that.
Yeah, the thing is these days, like I try to mainly get like buy things that on like Vinted or like charity shop and stuff, just because the fast fashion is like, you know, there's so many clothes already out there, so why not just utilise what's already there?
I'm not ashamed to go to Primark, man. I wear Primani. I'm going on holiday next week and it's going to be Primani all the way. Do you know what I mean? T-shirt and shorts. Hopefully the rain stays away, but we'll see how it goes in sunny Yarmouth. Sophie, on to you. Sorry, I do digress sometimes and chat a lot.
It's all right, I was getting into the conversation.
Appreciate that.
So, contrast of what Hannah's just said, I've been reading and listening to the podcast of Uncanny, which has been, love learning about ghosts and different ghost stories, which is what it's about. And me and my partner are going to watch Uncanny live next Monday. So
is that what you're into, ghosts and things like that? The supernatural? Scaring me now, Sophie.
Well, I think we've had like a few experiences at home, so it's like kind of it's interesting to see the different spectrum of what other people have experienced. So it's not even just ghost; it's like even time slips that people have, which is it's just quite fascinating of what people have experienced.
Like the Mandela effect. I'm sure it was called Looney Tunes, as in LOONEYTOONS, as in Looney cartoons, but tunes. Well, they're saying it's Looney Tunes, as in TUNES.
There's quite a few of them, I think, with different programs where it's like we all think it was one spelling, but it's actually not. Like, it's totally different spelling. Like, that's not how we remember it.
That's it. It's like the Mandela effect. I think. Don't quote me on this, but I think the Mandela effect is because people said that Nelson Mandela died in jail. There's a news report to say he died in jail or something like that, but he hadn't died. And they're saying that there wasn't a news report, and I don't know, but Looney Tunes was Looney Tunes. I suppose it's my go now. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the Tate Modern in London to the Yoko Ono exhibit. It was absolutely amazing. And I always thought Yoko Ono was a John Lennon disciple. I just thought she was one of his disciples. But after going to the exhibit and seeing all the work she did before she even met John Lennon, I think it was the other way around. I think John Lennon was one of her disciples, do you know what I mean? And she did a lot of it's like social art, if that makes sense. A lot of thinking outside the box, challenging the conventional, some really weird stuff as well, but there was some really good stuff. And I think, is it Marina Abramovich or something like that? That's a modern day artist where she does some out there things. And I thought that was really interesting. I never thought I'd like something like that, but it was brilliant. It was like when I went to about 10 plus years ago, my grandma took me to watch Prince at the O2 in London, but she never told me we were going to see Prince. We went to a retreat for the weekend, and I kept asking her, where are we going? And then she took me to see Prince, and it was one of the best shows I ever seen. And I never liked Prince before that, and I love Prince. So anyway, less about me. Let's get back to the podcast. So thanks for that input there. So as you know, it's International Youth Day 2024. So what I want to do is just give a bit of information about International Youth Day and just, I'm going to start waffling and talk about International Youth Day. So International Youth Day is commemorated every year on the 12th of August, bringing youth issues to the attention of the international community and celebrating the potential of youth as partners in today's global society. The idea of International Youth Day was proposed in 1991 by the young people who were gathered in Vienna, Austria, for the first session of the World Youth Forum of the United Nations system. The forum recommended that an International Youth Day be declared, especially for fundraising and promotional purposes, to support the United Nations Youth Fund in partnership with youth organizations. The theme for International Youth Day 2024 is From Clicks to Progress, Youth Digital Pathways for Sustainable Development. This theme highlights the key connection between digitalization and accelerating the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals, emphasizing the crucial contributions of young people in this transformative process. I've got a list of what the Sustainable Goals are. So we've got 17 listed on the UN website. Number 1 is no poverty. 2 is zero hunger. 3 is good health and well-being. 4, quality education. 5, gender equality. 6, clean water and sanitization. 7, affordable and clean energy. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. 10, reduced inequalities. 11, sustainable cities and communities. 12, responsible consumption and production. 13, climate action. 14, life below water. 15, life on land. 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. 17, partnership for the goals. That was a mouthful, I know, but I think it's important that we know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. And I think as well, generally, we do have an idea of these things, but it's not put to us in a focused way. But anyway, I'll carry on. So digital transformation is one of the 6 key transitions with catalytic and multiplier effects across the SDGs, and a significant determinant for achieving the goals. Technologies like mobile devices, digital platforms, and emerging innovations such as artificial intelligence play a crucial role in advancing the SDGs. Data generated from every digital interaction is fundamental to digital transformation, enabling evidence-based decision-making. It is estimated that digital technologies and data contribute to at least 70% of the 169 SDG targets, bringing about a profound impact across their economic, social, and environmental dimensions. For more information about International Youth Day, please visit the UN website. Thank you. So that was a bit of a mouthful, but I think it was important to go through that because that highlights a major characteristic that we're concerned with, particularly at the Mighty Creators, creativity. So I was going to ask, do you think creativity has a role in addressing global challenges? But I think it's quite obvious from what we've seen where the UN are trying different ways of engaging young people to help challenge global challenges. And I think that's really good because it might sound basic, but the youth are the future. So if you work with the youth, then they grow with the skills that we give them and they can help make a better impact on the world than us, let's say, in the present day. So, do you think there's a link between creativity and young people? Bit of a loaded question, but let's warm it up. What do you think, Hannah?
Yes, I think there definitely is. And I think also the role that creativity can play in addressing global challenges is a really big one. With the I Will Ambassadors, which is a movement of young youth voice, kind of very interlinked with the kind of UN Youth Day of, they kind of champion the voices of young people and young people who are already doing activism. And part of this year when they announced their new ambassadors, they kind of asked people, how are you doing your activism? And that idea of showing young people that there isn't one way to do activism and there isn't one way to kind of fight for social change. You don't have to be the person, at the side of the road chaining yourself. That's kind of a bit dangerous. Yeah. Maybe don't do that. But actually there are so many ways that you can create change. And I kind of label myself, if I had to, as a creative activist. So I use creativity for my activism and for creating change. And I think it's such a powerful one because you can use creativity in so many different ways, and it also can be done in really subtle ways as well. And I think sometimes big changes can be made with just real small, constant, representation. And I think that's what creativity can give. Even when you look at, for example, like TV shows, if you have that authentic representation throughout something, it's not, you don't have to make it the storyline, but that's using that creativity to show actually having that representation and having those issues addressed for the general public. And I think there's so much power in using creativity for making change. And I think, it's such a powerful form of communication. And I think often the impact of sharing something that is not only beautifully creative, but also has a really strong, powerful message is amazing. And I think young people are loving the creative world at the moment. There's so many, are getting into creative industries and stuff. And I think the world is very linear and puts people into boxes. And I think creativity allows expression and allows individuality in a world that is very set on kind of binary being the same. And I think that's the power that creativity gives. And I think young people these days are very passionate and very, wanting to get outside the box and wanting to, break the rules in a good way. So I think that's what creativity allows. And
nice. I appreciate that. You got any views on that, Sophie?
I just think it's an important way to spread important messages and make people aware of the things that, rather than just saying, oh, this is my opinion of how we should make the changes, I think it's more of a powerful message to get people to come around and to wanting to make change as well. So I think that's it is very important.
Completely agree. And to add on to that, it's it's demonstration, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think you put the work into creativity, you create something, people can see the effort in that. And it's look what I'm doing as well. I'm not just telling you we need to do this. I'm showing you something as well. And
I also think it shows how important it is to them, to that individual, but with how much effort they put into creating something. It's like, well, I'm showing you how it is important to change these.
That's an
whatever they
absolutely
wanted
brilliant
to change
point.
At the time, I'm putting in this much effort, and this is how much it means to me.
A brilliant point, because it's like people that. A painting, for example, let's just say, for the sake of the argument, someone creates a painting that challenges something. They've put in that time and effort to do the painting to a standard. It's not a scribble. Do you get what I mean? There's paints involved, there's structure in the image or whatever the image is, and there's a lot of time, effort, and love. Do you know what I mean? Because you create, a lot of the time, it's a passion for something that encourages you to create, and passion is another form of love, I suppose. My point I was going to say is, I think creativity is powerful in challenging, in helping resolve global challenges, because it's a language everybody understands. No matter what language you speak, everybody understands creativity. I think you can see something and appreciate that. Do you get what I mean? Like, if you go to say it doesn't even have to be something that's living, like a building. You can appreciate the creativity of a building, let's say. So, yeah, thank you for that. And I think young people as well, going to the question where is a link between creativity and young people, I think it's all linked, but I think young people are the drivers for change, especially in terms of creativity. I think it's been proven time again that the younger generation appear to be more in tune with creativity, and not saying they're more creative, but there's a lot more engagement with creativity, let's say, from the younger generations, and I think they're the leaders in terms of the change.
We're being allowed, I think, now, because I think that in the past, creativity was definitely viewed as not a very, career that you wouldn't go into. It's not
Absolutely.
a very stable career. And I think as young people are angry and they're cross with what's happening, they're feeling like they're not being listened to, they're more willing to step outside of what society might deem as successful and deem as the right thing to do. And I think with that, creativity comes, because I think in some ways creativity is quite rebellious.
Absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily, not in a bad way, but in a really good way. I think that it's that. And it's interesting, the point you just said about, you know, it being high, like kind of creativity means even more passion. When I was doing my musical theatre, one of the things we said about singing was our singing teacher was like, why are you singing? Why aren't you just talking? And it was that idea that the reason you start singing is because it's heightened emotion. The stakes have got higher. It means more. That's why you're singing and not just carrying on talking, kind of within the context of musical. And I think that's kind of with using creativity for change, is that you could just say it, but when you kind of start using creativity, the stakes are raised. And I think that kind of links nicely to that idea that you're using that because the stakes are so high that it really does matter.
And to add to what you're saying, it kind of proves that your point is proven with the UN. The UN creating an International Youth Day, a youth forum. I think they understand the stakes are high, and it's a creative way of engaging young people that might not have engaged previously, giving them a voice. It's like a youth voice.
There's so many opportunities now for young people to get involved, and it's, you know, still not enough, and there's still, you know, young people who don't even know about these opportunities, but being someone who kind of is in that thing, the amount of youth voice opportunities there are these days is phenomenal. And it's just like, you know, if you ever get a chance to take part in any kind of youth voice thing, it's really important because your voice does matter and it is powerful, and you really can. It sometimes can feel like, oh, well, what's the point? Because I'm not going to make any change. I mean, I have that a lot where I'm like, what am I doing all of this for? Because I just don't feel like, but actually every little thing, every little person, every little action makes a difference, and you put it all together.
Absolutely. Thank you for that input. Yeah, that was a good conversation. So that moving on to our next topic is the role that creativity plays when dealing or managing a diagnosis. So we've invited you guys onto the podcast today because Hannah, you received a late diagnosis for autism, and Sophie,
ADHD.
You received an early diagnosis for your little
son.
Thank you. So what I wanted to ask was, what are your thoughts on the role creativity has when managing a diagnosis? Because I can imagine, particularly like with you, Hannah, getting a late diagnosis, I don't want to put my foot in it, do you get what I mean? I'm a bit nervous with this one here. So I can imagine when you get a late diagnosis, it's kind of like, oh my word, what's happening to me? And it feels kind of burdensome, if that makes sense,
Yeah,
like a burden or something like that. So
a late diagnosis is a double-edged sword. I think it's very interesting. There's obviously, you know, positives of being diagnosed earlier, and obviously there also that comes with negatives, but I think the same with being late diagnosed. I think for me, I was diagnosed as autistic first, and then later on down the line, ADHD, and my profile of autism is pathological demand avoidance, which again explained things further. And I think a diagnosis by itself as a point, as a label, is one thing, but actually what the diagnosis gave me was my life back. And I think that thing of, it's so much more than a diagnosis, and it's not just a label, it's an explanation. And I think for me, before I had a diagnosis, I still thought I was different. I still knew there was something not quite right, but I blamed myself. I thought I was stupid. I thought I was unlovable. I thought I was just really a rubbish human. And when I got the diagnosis, it didn't happen overnight. And even actually for me, when I first got the diagnosis of autism is still very much trying to put you in a box. You know, the people still view autism as this very specific linear thing, and it isn't that. But when you get given a label and you're looking around you and you're thinking, still don't fit this label. So not only did I not belong before, I've now got a label and people are saying, well, look, you fit in with these people now. And you're like, no, I don't relate to this either. I feel like I'm kind of stuck in this middle ground and actually, to begin with, I felt even more broken because I was like, wait, so now I don't fit in with the neurotypical people, but I'm meeting all these autistic people. And again, they don't fully align with who I am. And it's that thing of obviously everyone's being unique and individual, but still I just didn't feel like I'd kind of found my tribe that people talk about.
Do you think getting a late diagnosis contributed to that? So, you know, when you're saying you was meeting other people with autism, do you know if they had an earlier diagnosis than yourself, and do you think that probably had an an impact?
I think it depends, and I think sometimes definitely the late diagnosis is definitely affected. I think the fact that I'd grown up with that idea of having what being autistic is, and I think I have a younger sibling who's assigned male at birth and was diagnosed younger because classic male signs of being autistic. So I had that contribution. I think also I was meeting people who are in different stages of their autistic identity, and I think that's a big thing, that just the day you're diagnosed doesn't then mean, right, I'm now fully embracing of being autistic. And I think I've spent a long time kind of learning what being autistic means to me, and that's kind of, I'll link it into a bit, like with the terms of creativity, is that when I used creativity to understand what being autistic means to me, because for every individual person it's different. And yes, autism is the diagnostic label, but for me, I don't like to view being autistic, ADHD, those things as a disease or something that I have. I view it as who I am. Like, they are my neurotype. That's how my brain is wired. And yes, I am disabled because in this society, we are living in a neurotypical society, and therefore I will inherently struggle for the rest of my life. But I don't have this thing. It's just who I am and the way I look, and that's come through not just the diagnosis, but then using creativity to explore just my identity as a whole. I think that thing of, I think it's definitely with the late diagnosis, it's interesting because you end up in this position where, and I find this all the time, is either you're too disabled or you're not disabled enough. That idea of, like, they look at me and they go, I've had people, oh, you can't be autistic because you can do your makeup.
It's like face value, innit?
You can't be autistic because you have a fashion sense. You can't be autistic because you do social media. You can't be autistic because of this. You can't be autistic because of that. So that thing, a whole narrative of, like, and then when you ask for support, people look at you like, oh, you're just being dramatic. Or that thing I had an experience literally just last week in the hospital, and the way that the consultant talked to me was appalling, absolutely horrific to anybody. And then when my mum was like, like, that's disability discrimination, absolutely shocked. Like, well, no, but she can't be disabled. You don't look like that if you're disabled. Sorry, disability doesn't have a look. And I think you come with that angle of it, of when you're trying to embrace this thing that you didn't realise you had, then you're embracing it and thinking, right, I'm going to learn to embrace who I am. And then, oh, hang on, now everyone's telling me that I'm not. Or the other angle is when you ask for support and go, oh, I'm autistic, this is my support needs passport. And they go, I don't think you should be here. You can't do that. You can't achieve that. And it's very hard balance to get to the middle. And I think for me, I have struggled with my autistic identity because it's hard, because the whole world is telling me I'm wrong, whatever angle I am. And then I'm in the middle, still confused and still needing support. I need support. And it doesn't matter what someone looks like, how someone dresses, what they wear, how articulate they can be. I can sit here and do a podcast and sound really articulate, and I am articulate, but in the same breath, I can struggle so massively. I have things the things people don't see behind closed doors. And I think it's that thing of, when it comes to a diagnosis, that a diagnosis is a label, it's a thing, but what that means to each individual person is very different and unique, and you can't tell that by looking at someone. Absolutely.
I think that's an important point to make as well. I think with because I think it's down to education as well. I think where you're saying, so we've got normal society in inverted commas, it's that if people aren't autistic or have a disability, they don't take the time out to understand somebody that does have a disability or they are autistic. Do you get what I mean? So then when they're saying to you, you don't look autistic, that's because the typical view that we're given of autism is extreme ends of the spectrum.
100%.
It's extreme. There's no middle ground. Do you get what I mean? So I think it's important to note that there isn't a look. And I think,
it's hard because even as autistic people, we don't get it. We don't get ourselves. And that thing of, like, one day I'll be able to do something, and then the next day I won't be able to. I mean, even like my own mum will go, and that thing is, I don't understand my own brain. So I appreciate that for someone else to come in, and especially when I know, like, having spoken to my gran, who's obviously a different generation, is still very much learning about this kind of thing. She does try very, very hard. And that thing of kind of, she said the other day, she was like, but it's just too big. It's too big because you've got children, you've got the classic boy, rocking, non-verbal, kind of unable to, perceive to communicate with the world. Obviously, actually, there's a lot more to it than that. Yeah. But that kind of stereotypical, neurotypical looking at that. And then you've got someone maybe like me, or even like my own sibling, who, again, was diagnosed younger, because assigned male at birth, but now isn't. But again, presents in a different way to, it's not Sheldon Cooper. We're not all kind of got that. It's really hard because that is massive. And if you're saying we've all got the same thing, we haven't got the same thing. And actually, I think it's really important to look at, I am autistic, but I have a pathological demand avoidance profile, which again is a different view of looking at autism. And then I'm also ADHD. So again, that's a different, like if you're imagining it's a mixing bowl, you're adding in more different ingredients. Then you add, and I also have complex PTSD, and I've had a lot of other mental health problems. So you kind of, that makes who I am. And then you compare that even to, like, for example, my sibling, who won't mind me talking about them, is autistic, got ADHD but without the H, so isn't hyperactive, and is dyslexic, and then has, again, separate mental health problems. But our autism is going to look very differently because we've added other mixes into the thing. And I think I was talking to somebody else, another autistic person, and we were saying that thing of, because learning disabilities are so thrown in with autism, I think that doesn't help the narrative. And I think if that could help, like, the general public learn more, is if there can be more of that. Obviously, absolutely, autistic people do have, some of them have learning disabilities, and that's going to present in one way. But then also, autism isn't per se a learning disability. And if you can separate the two, you can then start to look at, for example, like I'm autistic and then I'm ADHD, so I'm completely hyperactive. But that isn't an autism thing per se, the same as, like, having a learning difficulty, or if you have kind of different ways of communicating. And I think it's really hard because it's so complex. People, all people, we want to put things into boxes to understand it, and it doesn't work like that. But then it's really hard.
You want to categorize autism. You know what it is? I'm throwing my questions out the window now because this is a nice conversation where we're touching on everything. Do you get what I mean? So, Sophie, would you mind sharing your experiences with managing a diagnosis?
Yeah, in some ways I can really relate to Hannah because there is similar experiences that I've experienced with my son, even though he has been earlier diagnosed. Like, he's quite in the middle, where he's not severely autistic, where he's non-verbal, etc., but then he's not neurotypical either. So it is very hard for people to understand that they only see the box. Yeah. Then I think there needs to be more aware, especially when you see on programs, for example, all you see is just one type of autism. Yeah. But there is a spectrum, and anyone can be anywhere in between. The saying is, no, you don't meet two people the same with autism. That everyone is different, and everyone has different experiences which will affect them in different ways. But I think that in the creativity way, I think it has really helped my son a lot because it's also an outlet for him. Yeah. So whether it's to regulate his emotions, he has like special interests. So he likes learning about mushrooms, and he likes drawing his favourite characters, and he likes finding about the world that he lives in and the history. So it's kind of like me and my partner are all researching things that for his interest to find out, to educate him about his world that he's living in, and the history of everything. And
I think that's so beautiful because you know what it is? It's encouraging you as a family to experience and explore. You know, with 100%. Your son, like
we're learning with him. Do you know what I mean? So it's like when it was mushrooms, we'd got mushroom books to identify different ones. We'd gone out looking and hunting for mushrooms and trying to identify on an app to see which one they are. And the things that you learn, I would never know anything about that, about mushrooms. Do you know what I mean? I could tell you a lot about mushrooms now that I would have never known before. But I think it's nice that they do have that special interest, and I think it's really good to get involved with them to help them learn about it, rather than just go, oh, on your way, you learn about it. It's sort of come our interest as well. So yeah,
I think that's important, and I love the way that because I think when I was younger and I was a kid, there wasn't many of these discussions going on. There wasn't so much dialogue about autism or anything like that. It was kind of, you was pushed to the side. Like, they were pushed to the side.
Yeah, it's just you're different, and I don't really know how to deal with you. And
even my terminology, I said they were pushed to the side. Do you know they? Like, what do you mean they? Like, do you get what I'm saying? It was kind of ingrained in society as a whole. That's what it was. Whereas I feel now there's a lot more openness, and I think it's great that, like you just said, like you learn more with your son. Do you get what I mean? You're finding things out, and I think it's giving you your perfect example of using that to enhance the family unit and all of your experiences. Do you get what I mean? Learning about mushrooms and the world and things like that, and I think that's important. And it's kind of like, you might not have tried to study those things, but for your little boy receiving a diagnosis, do you get what I mean? So I think I like the way nowadays there's more of a positive turn, and there's more people trying.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I can understand that we're not all going to get it right off the bat. Do you get what I mean? But I think at least there's steps being taken to include. Do you get what I mean? Include people, equity, things of that nature. Do you know what I mean? Because I think, like I said, when I was young, there wasn't much of this. Do you get what I mean? It was like at school even, they were put in another room. I'm sorry, I don't.
I could totally relate, because I went to primary school and that was how it was. It was literally like, so we had a speech and language attached to ours, and they was in separate rooms. I suppose in some ways that's good because it helps them get more support needed for them, etc. But then when I think in year 6 we sort of like integrated for an art lesson, and it kind of felt like you didn't want to associate with them because there was no understanding. No one taught you that people are different. It was kind of like, oh, they're not like me, so I'm going to step away. I don't want to associate with them. But, you know, now he's in a school where he is so accepted, and the kids are so accepting, and they have like an autism awareness day.
Beautiful.
And I think the difference it's made, I think it's kind of amazing to see. Like, so one of his things he really struggles with is social.
Okay.
He's at the start of his first in year 1, he was in his own bubble. He would never really play with anyone. And in a way, that was, I suppose, for him, that's his safe space. And he still likes to have his own time, which is absolutely fine, because it's, you know, it helps him and regulate him and control his emotions. But then at the same time, as a parent, that was very hard to deal with. That is, you know, oh, my child's going to school, but he has no friends. And I don't want him to feel lonely or to feel not included. I think that is, I think as parents, you're always worrying, but then with a diagnosis, it's always an added worry on top that they're not going to be included, especially when you've had that experience when you was younger that they weren't included. Yeah,
because we're conditioned with what we know growing up. Do you know what I mean? I'm a bit older, do you know? I'm not going to say my age on the podcast, but it was very different growing up when I was young, growing up to what it is now. And I think it's moved so far from where we were. And
Absolutely.
Some people that are born in this era might not see it like that. Do you get what I mean? Like, they may think it's not the greatest, but there's been a massive improvement from where we were, say, 20 years ago to where we are now, even 10 years ago.
I think you only realise the changes it's been made is when you know about them situations.
Absolutely.
So, like, as a parent, because I've experienced it, I know the difference that has been made over the years. Whereas people that are not in that scenario, they probably wouldn't even think, oh, well, you know, nothing's changed. But it's nothing changed for them, etc., because they've not experienced
Absolutely.
that. But towards the end of, like, he's at the end of year 1 now, and, you know, he used to sit on a table with his support teacher, and, like, he doesn't even do that anymore. He sits with his friends, he looks for a friend, and so, you know, as a parent to hear that, it's like the proud moment. Or like when we go into school and I can see he's, you know, casually talking to one of his friends, like I'm not even there.
Yeah.
Normally he would need me there and he'd want me to stay.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like, I'm not needed now. So it's, in one way, it's like, oh, I'm not needed now. But at the same time, it's a very, very proud moment for me to see. And I think in that way, it's really good for an early diagnosis, because you're there to support them all the way. Although we're learning every day, so things will change and things you know, as he gets older, he'll go through, you know, through puberty and adulthood,
Yeah.
and we're going to be learning that
Yeah.
with him. So obviously there'll be different challenges, but you know, we're there to research and look into it and trying to educate him, and like, he already knows he's autistic, and I wanted for him to know that.
This is it.
So he doesn't think, why am I different?
Yeah.
Like, so he knows.
Brilliant.
So he knows about himself, and so he can understand himself a bit better.
Yeah, big up you, Sophie, man, because you know what it is? It's very refreshing hearing you speak, to get what I'm saying about the experience, because sometimes you don't know what what experience people are gonna have. Like, some people's experiences are different. But what I wanted to ask is, do you think the school are in tune with your son? Do you get what I mean? You know, in terms of his needs and things like that?
100%. There was a school that I was going to send him to, and because he didn't have funding in place, they weren't willing to give him extra support. And I was like, there is no way I can put him in there with no extra support, because he just wouldn't cope. At that point, he'd have a lot of meltdowns. You know, he was hitting out, lashing out, and that's how it was in nursery. And so for me to go in to a school where there's going to be lots of changes, it's a whole new routine, which, you know, a lot of autistic people do really struggle with change, and so it's hard for them to settle in, and especially without that extra support at the beginning is where they most need the support.
Absolutely.
So for me, I was like, there's no way I can put him in that school, so I homeschooled him for a little bit, and then eventually we found a school. And even when I said, what support can you put in place, this is before I'd even, you know, got him into that school. We'd looked around, and they was telling me everything that they can do to support him. Whereas the last school, I said, what can you do to support him? She couldn't even answer me. She was like, I need to go and ask and speak with the head teacher. But for me, that's not good enough. If you can't tell me how you're going to support my child, then he's not coming.
It's not very inclusive, is it?
No.
Do you get what I mean? So, because I was just thinking, when you was mentioning school and you saying that he sits with his friends and things like that, I was just thinking of, like, I've got some kids at school, and it's like, they share classes with autistic children as well, but it's normal, in inverted commas, do you know what I mean? Where everyone's mixing together. Like, it's kind of like where the classmates, like my daughter's aware of the young person's disability, but it isn't the person, if that makes sense. They still interact same way they would interact with the other young person. Do you get what I mean? That doesn't have a diagnosis. So I think that's why I asked that question, because I think schools, when you find the right schools, they are doing their bit, if that makes sense, to try and, especially in early years, I think it's really important, because that's where you gain your association with school, whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
so
100%. I agree with that, because school is like their second home, basically. And if they can't feel comfortable and being able to learn and be supported, then that's really one hard way of getting through life, especially in the beginning stages. And even as you're learning and you're growing, you're still trying to adjust and learn about yourself. So, I mean, even as adults we are anyway, but I mean, as kids you don't, you still get into grips with yourself and the world
at
around
the
you.
most, that's the where you're doing it the most, trying to figure out who you are from when you're born. And it goes back to the fact that we were saying things like with young people with a diagnosis, they're trying to find out who they are, and that they may struggle. I think the general person, generally, we're all in that. So I think it's an extra battle for someone with a diagnosis. And what you've explained about school, it really warms my heart. Do you know what I mean? Because they've taken the time out, and like you said, his experience from when he started to where he is now, like, that's all you can ask for as a parent. That's all you can ask for. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, so we had a bad experience with nursery. So even though they knew his struggles, one thing he really struggled with loud noises is he was absolutely petrified of the hand dryers in toilets, etc. So he'd be really good at using a toilet and stuff like that. There was no issues around that. But he would never go into toilets with hand dryers because he's just absolutely petrified of the noise. Whereas they was told that they need to be switched off. So he is able to do that. And there'd be times he'd be coming out to me saying, they've not switched the hand dryers off, or he can hear it from the other room. And so they was never inclusive for him. So he would have that struggle where, sometimes he wouldn't even be able to go to the toilet, or I would have to bring in a potty because So he wouldn't. Yeah, so he wouldn't go in there because they wouldn't switch it off. Whereas going into school, they was like, oh yeah, that's absolutely fine. They've switched it off, and eventually they've worked with him. And in a way, I've sort of, where it started off with ear defenders, kind of like trying to desensitize him with it. And so now he's like sort of overcome that fear, and he can put his hands under it, he can put his head under it, and it doesn't really bother him so much anymore. But I think from where he first started before he went to that school and to where he is now, he's a total different person. And I don't think we would have got there if it wasn't for school support.
And this is it. So do you think it was, sorry to ask the question, I'm just picking your brain now.
It's all right.
Do you think it was like an extra patience, like the school that he's at now, there was a patience for him to come out of his show when he wants to, bloom when he wants to, give him that agency to explore? Because that's what I'm getting. I'm getting... there's patience to it, and once you allow the time and the patience to become used to a setting or an environment, because like you're saying, change is a big factor. Once you're able to adapt to a setting, you can flourish like your son's 100%. Flourishing. You get what I mean?
100%. So I do totally agree with that, because with autism, it requires a lot of patience because they change very slowly. It's never really quick, so it's you take little steps, but for you they're massive steps.
Yeah.
So 100%. You talk to somebody else and they'll think, oh, it's just a little small step, but for us they're massive. So another thing he struggles with is eating. He's like very, very restrictive in his eating, and we've tried to make very slow progress, but like at his pace to encourage him. And then it was a few weeks ago, he was having school dinners. And
brilliant.
Like if I'd asked myself a few months ago whether he'd be having school dinners, I'd be like, absolutely no chance.
Oh, man.
But, for them little wins are massive and just make you so proud.
I wish I had a round of applause button here, so I could just like round of applause. But that's amazing. Amazing, really amazing, because dinners is a tough one. Kids eating. At the best of times, do you get what I mean? So to be at that moment where he's eating a school dinner, brilliant. Do you celebrate the small wins with him?
Yeah, 100%. Because it's like, oh my God, we're so proud of you, how far you've come. But obviously, there's them highs are really good, but you also do get the lows. Yeah. But I think the wins outweighs the lows all the time.
And the journey together, do you get what I mean? It's all about the journey. It's learning. We're learning right now. He's still young, so it's all learning process. I wanted to ask you, Hannah, patience. That's what I wanted to ask you about. I saw you nodding your head when Sophie was talking about patience.
I think, I am self-aware. And as an autistic person, just as all people are annoying and frustrating, absolutely a lot of the things that come with being, autistic are to the outside world really annoying and frustrating. And we are hard work, and there are things that are really, we do require so much more patience. And I think, that is a challenge. And you can appreciate, from the outside perspective, but with that, you're looking through the eyes of the neurotypical, and sometimes it's the idea of having to go at looking through it from the eyes of those whose brains are different, and thinking, how does that situation look from our point of view, and that we're not being difficult, we're not being, hard work, and actually, I view it as like, they always say, I wrote a poem and it was like, while you see in colour, I view all in 4D, and the idea that autistic people and those who are neurodivergent, we bring in what we're taking in every moment is like a much higher percentage than the neurotypical person, and we're constantly having everything bombarded at us.
Right.
And actually, when you think about it like that, no wonder we've got things that behaviours that people might call it, that was in inverted commas, that people are thinking, oh, that's not very desirable, because we're not looking at it from the same perspective as those who are neurotypical, and hence why we need those accommodations, because we're not on the same level. It's not a level playing field.
So with you getting a later diagnosis, did you have to be patient with yourself?
Very much so. I had to be really patient.
I can imagine that being a real challenge, because think about it. How old were you when you got your diagnosis?
19.
19. So imagine for 19 years, you've kind of operated thinking you were neurotypical.
19 years, I thought I was broken. I thought I was a failure. I thought I was a really rubbish person, that I couldn't do anything, that it was my fault. I thought I thought I was a broken human being, and hence why we then went to the mental health struggles, because I was so broken. I just couldn't fathom like what was wrong with me. Like I was just so rubbish. And then you get this diagnosis, and then it's almost like, oh my goodness, you go through so many different emotions, the kind of frustration, the anger that it was not picked up earlier because, you've struggled for so long and there was a reason behind why you struggled. The kind of fear of what does that mean? You have the stereotypes of thinking, what does this mean? What does that mean? The kind of then the ceiling that then people put on top of you, going, all right, okay, so you're autistic, so let's lower what you can achieve. You have then the whole thing of you've got to unlearn and unmask a 19 years of life. I have always done life in this neurotypical way, and I was so masked. I didn't know who I was. So it wasn't like kind of going back after my mental health problems. It wasn't like going back to who I was before. I had to like basically rebirth myself at 19 and like, who is Hannah? And I'm still there. I still have very dissociated in lots of times where I'm like, I still don't really know who I am. And that takes a long time to find, I think.
Completely. I get that. What I wanted to ask was, I keep forgetting because I don't want to interrupt. What was it? I was thinking about Sophie's experience and how...
Well, I was going to say on something that Sophie said about that, which really, it's lovely, I think, as someone who was late diagnosed and for someone who had a horrific time in school and for someone who is an autism advocate, and that thing of like, I spend all my days, and it's nice sometimes you can get to the whole point where like it all feels very negative, and it's nice to hear that there are those positive experiences, that the work that's being done is making a difference, and that there are autistic young people, the next generation coming through, who are not having the same experiences that we had. And that thing of like, how I went through school and many of my peers was horrible, and you wouldn't wish that upon anybody. And I think one of the things that really hurt me even more was to know that other people were going to have to go through that. And it's nice, and I know there will still be lots of young people who are going through this the way that we had, but it's nice to hear that there are positive glimmers. And absolutely, it's not a rose tinted story, and there's definitely so many difficulties, but to know that there, even if it's just a tiny sprinkle of maybe a school that had an idea of a support, like that's gone from like, that's mind boggling that actually there is. And I think it is hard from my perspective, is it can feel quite negative, I think, especially because still every day we're faced with the kind of discrimination and that ableism. And I think it's really interesting what Sophie said about, it's at the beginnings when they need the most support. And that was like, yes, it is. And actually, we need lots of support to begin with. But if you put that in right and you understand us, we don't need it forever. And I think that thing that forever, I've got a support needs passport that I created. And my fear when I share this is so big, because I share my support needs passport, and sadly it's come with evidence of people who I've given it to, and they look at that and go, we can't accommodate you.
Right.
Which firstly, I have an issue with anyway, of inclusion. But that thing of that idea that, and that's what my mum always tries to advocate for me, which we can never really seem to get across, that thing of, yes, it looks like a nightmare on paper. She looks like a nightmare on paper. She will need support. She will struggle to begin with. But if you can just stick with her, if you can let her ride it out, if you could offer, reasonable adjustments, nothing overly dramatic, the result you will get at the end, she will give you more than you could ever have dreamed of.
Absolutely.
And I think that thing of, it does seem scary, when you get, a young person or anyone who's coming to you and they're giving you the support needs passport, and they've got all these labels and these diagnoses, and they've got, these things that they struggle with, and they need this support, and then, they could have a meltdown, or they could, hurt themselves when they're in a meltdown, and you're thinking, I can't cope with this. And actually look behind that label, look behind that diagnosis, that behind all of that, we are still people, and we're the way that, we might have things, when I'm in a meltdown, I often self-harm. That's just, I can't express anything in a different way. But actually, I'm not a dangerous person. I'm not a bad person. I'm not an incapable person. And actually, if I'm allowed to ride it and go with it and get that other people believing in me and wanting me in the space, I can achieve the things that I want to achieve. And it's looking behind that diagnosis of like, we are still people. We are more than a diagnosis, but we are also our diagnosis in the same breath. You know, it's that thing I am autistic, and I will never, that's why I always say I am, I never say I have, because for me, the language really matters when I'm talking about myself, and I have this thing of I don't have it, I am it. And that doesn't mean that it, you know,
doesn't define you.
Doesn't define me. But in some ways, it kind of does define me in a way that it doesn't define me, as in like in a bad way, but it defines me in a good way of like, that's just who I am. The same way as like special interest. I am obsessed with jelly cats, and like we love a special interest. And like you know, do I want to be defined by my love of jelly cats? Well, actually, yeah, I kind of do, to be honest, because they are really cool and I want more, but I can't afford it. But I think that thing of being autistic, if I wasn't autistic, if my brain wasn't wired this way, I wouldn't be who I am.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And obviously there are difficulties, but the difficulties come from the ableism, come from the societal. And that's not blaming society.
External.
Yeah, it's not blaming society, not blaming other people, but it just is the system that we live in. And I think the one thing that I would, if I could give a message to people as an autistic person who is constantly not even given the chance to even start, it would be, please see behind a diagnosis, see behind a label, see behind a behaviour, and see that there is a person in there. And that behaviour that we're displaying is a communication. It's a form of communication. And absolutely, you know, there are lines, and there's laws, and there's, you know, I can't go around hurting anybody else just the same way as no one else can go around hurting me. But in the same breath, I may do things in a different way, and I may take time. And I, you know, especially to begin with, the beginning's always a nightmare. But if you can just sit with me and go through it, you won't have to do that forever.
Right.
Agreed. I think you have to ride the wave.
Yes.
And
that's what my mum says. She's like, you got to ride the Hannah wave. She's like, ride it. And she's always telling people, she's like, you know, just bear with her. And they're like, no, she's crazy. Get her away from me. And then it works.
I remember now. What I wanted to ask was, Sophie spoke about the family working together with her son in terms of exploring and researching. What's your family, what's your support network like?
My mum is the biggest support I could ever have asked for.
Brilliant.
And it's interesting because obviously now we know, we've got a label for it, a diagnosis. I have pathological demand avoidance, or what I prefer to call it, pervasive drive for autonomy, because it's a better way of explaining it. And for that, there's what we call panda parenting. And if my mum hadn't panda parented me without knowing, she didn't realise she was doing it, I would definitely not be here right now, because I'd have just...
What is panda parenting?
Look it up on the PDA website, because the PDA Youth Society website, I won't be able to do it justice. Do you know a bit about that?
Yeah, I would say it's just basically you don't like being told what to do. So in some ways, this is like my son. Sometimes it can be a constant battle in the morning. Can you do this? Can you do this?
Right.
And they don't like the idea of being told you've got to do this. Yeah. So for example, another way that we would do it is he needs to go and brush his teeth in the morning. Instead of going, you need to brush your teeth, can you go and do it now? It's kind of, shall we race to the bathroom and go and brush your teeth? It's kind of like giving them that option. They don't like being told this is final and this is what they have to do. They like more options and more that they're in control of things.
I agree.
Rather than being told, you're doing this, it's my decision, not yours.
That comes with the pervasive...
I think I use some panda parenting
pervasive drive for autonomy, and I think that thing of it, people look, you know, you could look and think, oh, well, you know what, they just need to get on with it. If their mum tells them to brush their teeth, they just need to go and do it. But pervasive drive for autonomy, which is the pathological demand avoidance profile of autism, it's not a choice, it's the demand. Anything can be a demand. The anxiety that brings is something that I cannot explain in words, and that's where it comes from for me. Like, that's where that thing of, I'm not being defiant, I'm not going, no, I cannot explain the anxiety that comes with not being able to do a demand. So it is that thing of having, and it's interesting because I have ARFID, which can be linked to being neurodivergent, not necessarily, doesn't have to be, which is an eating disorder categorized by, people call it very fussy eating. It is obviously a lot more than that. And that thing of like PDA, if you've got PDA and ARFID, we've got a combination that's not going well. That thing of, but... You know, because obviously that ARFID is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, so it's struggling with food and with kind of restricted diet, nothing to do with body image and weight. It's to do with like either sensory, or it could be anxiety, emetophobia. All those different things can cause or be part of the reason, sensory issues in terms of food. But then when you add PDA in, you've got to eat, because obviously you've got to live. But then food becomes a demand, and how do you navigate that? And I think it's interesting, that thing of what my mum has done, and which is we didn't even realise at the time, is like that thing of just leaving food, obviously within things that aren't going to go out, and that thing of, she'll just leave a drink on the side, not mention it, because if she says to me, you haven't drunk all day, you need to drink, then that's it, my brain's gone off. But there's some apple tangos in the... I love an apple tango. There's an apple tango in the fridge. There's some chocolate on the side. I just have a little nibble, and like that thing of...
It's that's coaxing you out.
It is, and it's tricky, because you have someone like me who now I know all the techniques, so I can see through it. I'm like, I know what you're doing. But obviously, as you get older, you learn that you have to, because not everyone, you have to actually like try. But I think that thing of it is, and I'm really lucky that my mum. We always say, like, in my family, if I hadn't got my mum, everyone would have been, quite frankly, like, gone, because it would have just been a disaster. And I'm so lucky to have that support and that unwavering support. And she, she's very honest about her children. She knows her children aren't perfect. She's absolutely, but she has got our backs, and she advocates, and she, completely understands. And, right from the beginning, when we were going through this, she didn't know necessarily. And again, that thing, I remember when I was told I had pervasive drive for autonomy, she laughed down the phone, because what she'd heard about that was it's like ODD, like, when you like throw things around and like like really angry, and really not angry, oppositional defiance disorder. So and so she thought it was that, and she was like, well, you've never thrown a chair. I was like, not yet, Beverly, we'll see what happens. But then we learned about it, but she's always learning, and she's always willing to learn, and she wants to learn, and she does all of her own research. And it's now, she's obviously got two children who are neurodivergent, and she's just amazing, and she's a primary school teacher.
Oh, brilliant.
So and that is having us, and like, I hopefully for the children that are in her, under her care, she really does get it. And I think that for me is that thing, she's my safe person, and I always need a safe person. And when I can't bring her, I bring her in teddy form, which is my teddy bear that's with me. And I wish I could just shrink her into like a little fairy size and put her in my pocket, because she just is that thing of like, when I'm with her, I feel completely safe.
Does your mum listen to the podcast?
Yes, if she can work out how to get onto it, but she will be listening to Clark.
Make sure you shout her out then. Shout your mum out.
Hello, Beverly.
Big up Beverly, man. You're doing an amazing job.
She does.
Big up Sophie. You're doing an amazing job as well. You know what it is? Like, I could talk to you lot for ages, but we do have a time limit.
I did tell you, autism is a big thing
that
you could talk to about for a long time.
I think it's great, and I think you've given us some real brilliant insight. Do you know what I mean? And I think the people that listen, it's going to help. And hopefully we have people that are autistic, and it's going to help, because I think having two perspectives, like one from the parent's perspective, one from a late diagnosis, I think it's really important, and it's helped me.
And I think in the future, I think it would be interesting just like to get, like, say, for example, my mum, her perspective of someone who's late diagnosed, like from a parent's perspective. I think because it is that thing that it is different, and each person's experience is different, but that doesn't invalidate anybody else's experience. And actually, when you get the voices of lots of different ways, I'm sure if you spoke to your son, I'd have a completely different perspective on the whole matter. And I think that's amazing. And that's actually, and that idea that doesn't invalidate, just because their experience might be different to what I've experienced, doesn't mean that either of us are less autistic or more autistic or less valid or more valid. It's just different, and that's okay. And
I think there's peer learning there. There's peer learning. There's probably things that you might have said that Sophie's going to think, never thought about that. Or Sophie said something, you're thinking, I never thought about that. Or even listeners listening to it, I think it's all valid. All valid experience. All the experiences are valid, because it's all about helping one another. Each one teach one. It's a community, and like I was saying before, things are changing. It may not be the fast changes that we might require, but they are changing slowly but surely. Like you said to me earlier on, that you chose a university, they weren't accommodating to your needs.
No. And
then we went to another one, we found a new one that was. Do you get what I mean? So I think sometimes you're going to find places that are and places that aren't, but it's not 100%. To say that the first place can't eventually get to that.
Oh, no.
I think it's patience around the board.
Yeah.
And just being open and having the dialogue.
Paces, you know, people have got different paces.
They have,
Do you know what I'm saying?
And I think that's when it comes to that youth voice and that thing of, you know, the advocates, the young advocates who are, you know, autistic or whatever you're advocating for, that's why it matters. And that's why, you know, I'm passionate about doing it, because I know that hopefully by sharing my voice, sharing my stories, talking about these things, that I'm planting the seeds for the, you know, in the next person. They might go to that university and they might not be told that they're too disabled or whatever to do that course. And that thing of, you know, that's where the power in kind of youth and that idea of creativity, using that. And I think I wanted to add in a point about, you know, using creativity in terms of a diagnosis. I think I used creativity as a form of exploring my identity when it comes to like autism, ADHD and all of that. And I think there needs to be more places and more spaces for kind of, I'm very passionate about peer mentoring when it comes to neurodivergence. I think that idea of when I was younger, if I'd known that I was neurodivergent, having an older role model would have been life-changing. And I think that idea, just to see someone who, you know, you're like, oh, they are weird like me and they're thriving. So, and also in the same way of going, look, they still can't have the hand dryers turned on, but you know what? They've got their ear defenders on in that toilet at 25 and they're loving it. So I have my ear defenders, and if you have that thing of like going, oh, actually, you know what? Like, I think that really does give hope. And I think using creativity in groups, peer mentoring, and I think creativity has that power to unite not just neurodivergent people together, but for them to explore who they are, regardless of anything, just
be allowed to do that,
be allowed to, and have that form of expression, and let some of that anger out that we have because the world is so tricky for us. And, you know, using creativity, we can express the things that we are unable to do by a word, and whether that be because, you know, we are someone who doesn't communicate verbally anyway, or whether we do communicate verbally, but there are some things that just cannot be explained with words. There's so many feelings that I have that I cannot explain with words, but a dance, a song, a piece of artwork can express those.
It's like what we said earlier on, creativity is a language that everybody understands.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? Thank you for that. And my final question before we end the podcast episode is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? Sophie?
Just take it day by day and you'll get through it. And also that we made it through the diagnosis, and we made it through the HCP, and we made it through, like, he's starting to eat new foods. It's like amazing.
I love that. Yo, big up Sophie's son. I'm not going to say the name, but big him up, man. It's been really nice. What would I tell my younger self? I have to do one of these every episode, you know.
You have to think of
a new one every
time. A new one. What would I tell my younger self? Enjoy the journey. Do you get what I mean? There's going to be peaks and troughs. You're going to trip over. You're going to get back up. But I think the important part is enjoying the journey, because you'll get to a point where you get to look back at the journey.
I think I wish I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. It's like school. I hated school. Every day I was at school. But when I look back at school, it was like, that was the best time of my life.
I should have learned to just enjoy it and
get what I mean?
Just live each day as it comes.
It was rebellious. I was being a rebel. I didn't want to be there. It's like, but what would I have been doing? Not be at school. I want to play out. But all my other friends are at school. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's what I'd say. Enjoy the journey. Take it in. And, yeah, man, we'll make it through.
I think a piece of advice, maybe for my not so younger self, I think last time I did this, I think I did it like my real younger self, it would be to the kind of, probably the girl who'd just been diagnosed. I would say that the diagnosis isn't, you know, a magic wand. It's not an answer in terms of like, it's not all going to change, but that diagnosis is what you make of it, and you can learn and find your identity through that, and just take it day by day, step by step. And that, you know, the diagnosis, the whatever it is, whatever other people perceive you as, you have the power to find your own identity through that, and no one else can take that away from you.
Beautiful.
A new beginning.
Yes.
Appreciate that. So, you've been listening to the Mighty Voices podcast. My name's Levi Knight, Youth Program Coordinator for the Mighty Creatives, and I've been joined by Sophie and Hannah. Thank you very much. Please tune in next time. See you later.